Well, good evening, my friends. I can't believe it. We're finally here. Guess I should have written it down. How many days? Oh, excuse me. How many days we've been reading The Jungle, but it sure feels like a long time. And to tell you the truth, it hasn't really been that long, but man, I got some active hair going here. Um, we read April Morning pretty quick. So this book, I think, compared to April Morning, has really gone quite some time, but we got I think 19 pages to go, and we are on chapter 31, and we are ready to get this bad boy done. I was really hoping we had switched over to a new internet service and they were shipping out the router and we were supposed to have it by now. Literally, we are going to have 15 times the internet speed. And quite honestly, our speed isn't that bad, but I think that it's just everybody's using the internet now, even more than ever. So that's what I think is really slowing us down. But anywho, my friends, let's get to it. Last chapter, we are rocking and rolling. We are just about to finish our journey with our Lithuanian friends. So let's do it. One of the things that Jurgis had done after he got a job was to go see Marija. She came down into the basement of the house to meet him, and he stood by the door with his hat in his hand, saying, "I've got work now, and so you can leave here." But Marija only shook her head. There was nothing else for her to do, she said, and nobody to employ her. She could not keep her past a secret. Girls had tried it, and they were always found out. There were thousands of men who came to this place, and sooner or later she would meet one of them. And besides, Marija added, "I can't do anything. I'm no good. I take dope. What could you do for me?" "You can stop," Jurgis cried. "No," she answered. "I'll never stop. What's the use of talking about it? I'll stay here until I die, I guess. It's all I'm fit for." And that was all he could get her to say. There was no use trying. When he told her he would not let Elizabeth to take her money, she answered indifferently. "Then it'll be wasted here, that's all." Her eyelids closed and looked heavy, and her face was red and swollen. He saw that he was annoying her, that she only wanted him to go away. So he went, disappointed and sad. Poor Jurgis was not very happy in his home life. Elizabeth was sick a good deal now, and the boys were wild and unruly, and very much the worst for their life upon the streets. But he stuck by the family nevertheless, for they reminded him of his old happiness, and when things went wrong, he could solace himself with the plunge into the socialist movement. Since his life had been caught up into the current of this great stream, things which had before been the whole of his life to him came to seem a relatively slight importance. His interests were elsewhere, in the world of ideas. His outward life was commonplace and uninteresting. He was just a hotel porter and expected to remain one while he lived. But meantime, in the realm of thought, his life was a perpetual adventure. There was so much to know, so many wonders to be discovered. Never in all of his life did Jurgis forget the day before the election, when there came a telephone message from a friend, Harry Adams, asking him to bring Jurgis to see him that night. And Jurgis went and met one of the minds of the movement. The invitation was from a man named Fisher, a Chicago millionaire who had given up his life to settlement work and had a little moment in the heart of the city slums. Oh, excuse me. He did not belong to the party, but he was in sympathy with it. And he said that he was to have as his guest that night the editor of a big Eastern magazine who wrote against socialism, but really did not know what it was. The millionaire suggested that Adams bring Jurgis along and then start up the subject of pure food, in which the editor was interested. Young Fisher's home was a little two-story brick house, dingy and weather-beaten outside, but attractive within. The room that Jurgis saw was half lined with books, and upon the walls were many pictures, dimly visible in the soft yellow light. It was cold. It was a cold, rainy night, so a log fire was crackling in the open hearth. 7 or 8 people were gathered about it when Adams and his friends arrived, and Jurgis saw to his dismay that 3 of them were ladies. He had never talked to people of this sort before, and he fell into an agony of embarrassment. He stood in the doorway, clutching his hat tightly in his hands, and he made a deep bow to each of the persons as he was introduced. Then, when he was asked to have a seat, he took his chair in a dark corner and sat upon the edge of it. He wiped the perspiration from his forehead with his sleeve. He was terrified lest they should expect him to talk. There was the host himself, a tall, athletic young man, clad in evening dress, as also was the editor, a deceptive-looking gentleman named Maynard. There was the former's frail young wife, and also an elderly lady who taught kindergarten in the settlement, and a young college student, a beautiful girl with an intense and earnest face. She only spoke once or twice while Jurgis was there, and the rest of the time she sat by the table in the center of the room, resting her chin in her hands and drinking in the conversation. There were 2 other men whom young Fisher had introduced to Jurgis as Mr. Lucas and Mr. Schliemann. He heard them address Adams as comrade, and so he knew that they were also socialists. The one called Lucas was a mild and meek-looking little gentleman of clerical aspect. He had been an itinerant evangelist, it transpired, and had seen the light and become a prophet of the new dispensation. He traveled all over the country, living like the apostles of old, upon hospitality and preaching upon street corners where there was no hall. The other man had been in the midst of the discussion with the editor when Adams and Jurgis came in, and at the suggestion of the host, they resumed it after the interruption. Jurgis was soon sitting spellbound, thinking that there was surely the strangest man that here was surely the strangest man that had ever lived in the world. Nicholas Schliemann was a Swede, a tall, gaunt person with hairy hands and bristling yellow beard. He was a university man and had been a professor of philosophy until, until, as he said, he found that he was selling his character as well as his time. Instead, he had come to America, where he lived in a garret room in the slum district and made volcanic energy take the place of fire. He studied the composition of foodstuffs and knew exactly how many proteins and carbohydrates his body needed. And by scientific chewing, he said that he tripled the value of all he ate, so that it cost him 11 cents a day. About the 1st of July, he would leave Chicago for his vacation on foot, and when he struck the harvest fields, he would set to work for $2.50 a day, and come home when another year's supply, $125. There was the nearest approach to independence a man could make under capitalism, he explained. He would never marry, for no sane man would ever allow himself to fall in love until after the revolution. He sat in a big armchair with his legs crossed and his head so far in the shadow that one saw only 2 glowing lights reflected from the fire on the hearth. He spoke simply and utterly without emotion, with the manner of a teacher, setting forth to a group of scholars an axiom in geometry. He would enunciate such propositions as made the hair of an ordinary person rise on end. And when the auditor had asserted his non-comprehension, he would proceed to elucidate by some new proposition yet more appalling. To Jurgis, Herr Dr. Schliemann assumed the propositions of a thunderstorm or an earthquake, and yet, strange as it might seem, there was a subtle bond between them, and he could follow the argument nearly all the time. He was carried over the difficult places in spite of himself, and he went plunging away in a mad career, a very Mazeppa ride upon the wild horse speculation. Nicholas Schliemann was familiar with all the universe, and with the man as a small part of it. He understood human institutions and blew them about like soap bubbles. It was surprising that so much destructiveness could be contained in one human mind. Was it government? The purpose of government was the guarding of property and rights. The I'm sorry. The purpose of government was the guarding of property rights. The ancient force and modern fraud, or was it marriage? Marriage and prostitution were the two sides of one shield. The predatory man's exploitation of the sex pleasure. The difference between them was a difference of class. If a woman had money, she might dictate her own terms: equality, a life contract, and the legitimacy, that is, the property rights of her children. If she had no money, she was a proletarian and sold herself for an existence. And then the subject became religion, which was the archfiend's deadliest weapon. Government oppressed the body of the wage slave, but religion oppressed his mind and poisoned the stream of progress at its source. The working man was to fix the hopes upon a future life, while his pockets were picked in this one. He was brought up in frugality, humility, obedience, in short, to all the pseudo virtues of capitalism. The destiny of civilization would be decided in one final death struggle between the Red International and the Black, between socialism and the Roman Catholic Church, while here at home, the Stygian midnight of American evangelicalism. Whoa! So capitalism and religion are ruining us all. And here the ex-preacher entered the field, and there was a lively tussle. Comrade Lucas was not to be called an educated man. He knew only the Bible, but it was the Bible interpreted by real experience. And what was the use, he asked, of confusing religion with men's perversions of it? That the church was in the hands of the merchants at the moment was obvious enough, but already there were signs of rebellion. And if Comrade Schliemann could come back a few years from now, ah, yes, and the other said, of course, I have no doubt that in 100 years the Vatican will be denying that it ever opposed socialism, just as at present it denies that it ever tortured Galileo. I am not defending the Vatican, exclaimed Lucas vehemently. I am defending the Word of God, which is one long cry of the human spirit for deliverance from the sway of oppression. Take the 24th chapter of the book of Job, which I am accustomed to quote in my address as the Bible of the Bible upon the beef trust, or take the words of Isaiah, or the Master himself, not the elegant prince of our debauched and vicious art, not the jeweled idol of our society churches, but the Jesus of the awful reality, the man of sorrows and pain, the outcast, despised of the world, who had nowhere to lay his head. I will grant you Jesus, interrupted the other. Well then, cried Lucas, and why should Jesus have nothing to do with his church? Why should his words and his life be of no authority among those who profess and adore him? Here is a man who was the world's first revolutionist, the true founder of the socialist movement, a man whose whole being was one flame of hatred for wealth, and all that wealth stands for the pride of wealth, for the luxury of wealth, for the tyranny of wealth, who was himself a beggar and a tramp, a man of the people, an associate of saloon keepers and women of the town, who again and again, in the most explicit language, denounced wealth and the holding of wealth. Lay not upon yourselves treasures on the earth. Sell that ye have and give alms. Blessed are ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Woe unto you that are rich, for ye have received your consolation. Verify, I say unto you, that a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven, who denounced in unmeasured terms the exploiters of his own time. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Woe unto you also, you lawyers, you serpents, ye generation of vipers! How can ye escape the damnation of hell? Who drove out the businessmen and brokers from the temple with a whip? Who was crucified? Think of it, for an incendiary and disturber of social order. And this man they have made into the high priest of property and smug respectability, a divine sanction of all the horrors and abominations of modern commercial civilization. Jeweled images are made of him, sensual priests burned incense to him, and modern pirates of industry bring their dollars. They wrung them from the toils of helpless women and children and build temples to him and sit in cushioned seats and listen to his teachings, expounded by doctors of dusty divinity. Bravo, cried Schliemann, laughing, but the other was in full career. He had talked this subject every day for 5 years, had never let himself be stopped. This Jesus of Nazareth, he cried, this class-conscious working man, this union carpenter, this agitator, lawbreaker, firebrand, anarchist, he, the sovereign lord and master of a world which grinds the bodies and souls of human beings into dollars. If he could come into the world this day and see the things that men have made in his name, would it not blast his soul with horror? Would he not go mad at the sight of it? He, the Prince of Mercy and Love, the dreadful night when he lay in the Garden of Gethsemane and writhed in agony until he sweat blood. Do you think that he saw anything worse than he might see tonight upon the plains of Manchuria, where men march out with a jeweled image of him before them, to do wholesale murder for the benefit of foul monsters of sensuality and cruelty? Do you not know that if he were in St. Petersburg right now, he would take the whip, which would be drove out by the bankers from his temple? Here the speaker paused an instant for breath. No, comrade, said the other dryly, for he was a practical man. He would take pretty little imitation lemons. Such are now being shipped into Russia, handy for carrying in the pockets and strong enough to blow a whole temple out of sight. Lucas waited until the company had stopped laughing over this, and then he began again. But look at it from the point of view of practical politics, comrade. Here is an historical figure whom all men reverence and love, whom some regard as divine, and who was one of us, who lived our lives and taught our doctrine. And now shall we leave him in the hands of his enemies? Shall we allow them to stifle and stultify his example? We have his words, which no one can deny, and shall not quote them to his people, and prove them that he was, and what he taught, and what he did. No, 1,000 times no. We shall use his authority to turn out the knaves and sluggards from his ministry, and we shall yet rouse the people into action. Whoa. Woo! Lucas halted, and the other stretched out his hands to a paper on the table. Here, comrade, he said with a laugh, here is a place for you to begin. A bishop whose wife has been robbed of $50,000 worth of diamonds, and a most unconscious and oily of bishops, an eminent of scholarly bishop, a philanthropist and friend of labor bishop, a civic federation decoy duck for the chloroforming of the wage working man. To this little passage of arms, the rest of the company sat as spectators. And now Mr. Maynard, the editor, took occasion to remark, somewhat naively, that he had always understood that socialists had a cut-and-dried program for the future of civilization, whereas here were two active members of the party who, from what he could make out, were agreed about nothing at all. Would the two, for his enlightenment, try to ascertain just what they had in common and why they belonged to the same party? This resulted, after much debating, in the formulating of two carefully worded propositions. First, that a socialist believes in the common ownership and democratic management of the means of production, the necessities of life. And second, that a socialist believes that the means by which this is to be brought about is the class-conscious political organization of the wage earners. Thus far they were at one, but no farther. To Lucas, the religious zealot, the cooperative commonwealth was the New Jerusalem, the kingdom of heaven, which is within you. To the other, socialism was simply a necessary step towards a far distant goal. a step to be tolerated with impatience. Schliemann called himself a philosophic anarchist, and he explained that an anarchist was one who believed that the end of human existence was the free development of every personality, unrestricted by laws save those of its own being. Since the same kind of match would light everyone's fire and the same shaped loaf of bread would fill everyone's stomach, it would be perfectly feasible to submit industry to the control of the majority vote. There was only one earth, and the quality of material things was limited. Of intellectual and moral things, on the other hand, there was no limit, and one could have more without another's having less. Hence, communism in material production, anarchism in intellectual, was the formula of modern proletariat thought. As soon as the birth of agony was over and the wounds of society had been healed, there would be established a simple system whereby each man was credited with the labor and debited with the purchases. And after that, the processes of production, exchange, and consumption would go on automatically and without our being conscious of them, any more than I had in conscious of the beating of his heart. And then explained Schliemann, society would break up into independent, self-governing communities of mutually congenial persons, examples of which at present were clubs, churches, and political parties. After the revolution, all the intellectual, artistic, and spiritual activities of men would be cared for by such free associations. Romantic novelists would be supported by those who like to read romantic novels, and impressionist painters would be supported by those who like to look at impressionist pictures. And the same with preachers and scientists, editors and actors and musicians. If anyone wanted to work or paint or pray and could find no one to maintain him, he could support himself by working part of the time. That was the case at present, the only difference being that the competitive wage system compelled a man to work all the time to live, while after the abolition of privilege and exploitation, anyone would be able to support himself by an hour's work a day. Also, the artist audience of the present was a small minority of people, all debased and vulgarized by the effort it had cost them to win in the commercial battle of the intellectual and artistic activities which would result when the whole of mankind was set free from the nightmare of competition. We could, at present, form no conception whatever. And then the editor wanted to know about what Dr. Schliemann asserted that it might be possible for a society to exist upon an hour's toil by each of its members. Just that, answered the other, would be the productive capacity of society if the present resources of science were utilized. We have no means of ascertaining, but we may be sure it would exceed anything that would sound reasonable to minds inured to the ferocious barbarities of capitalism. After the triumph of the international proletariat, war would, of course, be inconceivable. And who can figure the cost of war to humanity? Not merely the value of lives and the material that it destroys, not merely the cost of keeping millions of men in idleness, or arming and equipping them for battle and parade, but the drain upon the vital energies of society by the war attitude and the war terror, the brutality and ignorance, the drunkenness, prostitution, the crime, in crime it entails, the industrial impotence of the moral deadness. Do you think that it would be too much to say that 2 hours of working time of every efficient member of a community goes to feed the red fiend of war? Then Schliemann went on to outline some of the wastes of competition, the losses of industrial warfare, the ceaseless worry and fiction, the vices, such as drink, for instance, the use of which had nearly doubled in 20 years as a consequence of the intensification of the economic struggle, the idle and the unproductive members of the community, the frivolous rich, the pauperized poor, the law and the whole machinery of repression. Oh, excuse me. The waste of social ostentation. The milliners, the tailors, the hairdressers, dancing masters, chefs, and lackeys. You understand, he said, that in a society dominated by the fact of commercial competition, money is necessarily the test of prowess, and wastefulness the sole criterion of power. So we have at the present moment a society with, say, 30% of the population occupied in producing useless articles, and 1% occupied in destroying them. And this is not all, for the servants and panders of the parasites are also parasites. The milliners and the jewelers, and the lackeys have also supported by the useful members of the community. Ugh, excuse me. And bear in mind also that this monstrous disease affects not merely the idlers and their menials. Its poison penetrates the whole society body. Beneath the 100,000 women of the elite are the million middle-class women, miserable because they are not the elite and trying to appear of it in public. And beneath them, in turn, are 5 million farmers' wives reading fashion papers and trimming bonnets, and shop girls and serving maids selling themselves into brothels for cheap jewelry and imitation sealskin robes. And then consider that, added to this competition is display. You have, like oil on the flames, a whole system of competition in selling. You have manufacturers contriving tens of thousands of catch-penny devices, storekeepers displaying them, the newspapers and magazines filled up with advertisements of them. And don't forget the wastes of fraud put into young Fisher. And don't forget the wastes of fraud put in young Fisher. When one comes to the ultra-modern profession of advertising, replied Schliemann, the science of persuading people to buy what they do not want, he is in the very center of the ghastly charnel house of capitalist destructiveness, and he scarcely knows which of a dozen horrors to point out first. But consider the waste in time and energy incidental to making 10,000 varieties of a thing for purposes of ostentation and snobbishness, where one variety would do for use. Consider all of the waste incidental to the manufacture of cheap qualities of goods made to sell and deceive the ignorant. Consider the waste of adulteration, the shoddy clothing, the cotton blankets, the unstable tenements, the ground cork life preservers, the adulterated milk, the aniline soda water, the potato flour sausages. And consider the moral aspects of the thing, put in the ex-preacher. Precisely, said Schliemann. The low knavery and the ferocious cruelty incidental to them, the plotting and the lying and the bribery, the blustering and the bragging, the scheming egotism, the hurrying and the worrying, of course, imitation and adulteration are the essence of competition. They are but another form of the phrase, to buy in the cheapest market and sell in the dearest. A government official has stated that the nation suffers a loss of $1.25 billion a year through adulterated foods, which means, of course, not only materials wasted that might have been useful outside of the human stomach, but doctors and nurses for people who would otherwise have been well, and undertakers for the whole human race, 10 or 20 years before the proper time. Then again, consider the waste of time and the energy required to sell these things in a dozen stores, where one would do. There are 1 million or 2 of businesses firms in the country, 5 or 10 times as many clerks, and consider the handling and rehandling, the accounting, the reaccounting, the planning and worrying, the balancing of petty profit and loss. Consider the whole machinery of civil law made necessary by these processes, the libraries of ponderous tomes, the courts, the juries who interpret them, the lawyers studying to circumvent them, the pettifogging and the chicanery, the hatreds and the lies. Consider the waste incidental to the blind and the haphazard production of commodities, the factories closed, the workers idle, the goods spoiling in storage. Consider the activities of the stock manipulator, the paralyzing of whole industries, the overstimulation of others for speculative purposes, the assignments and the bank failures, the crises and the panics, the deserted towns and the starving populations. Consider the energies wasted in the seeking of the markets, the sterile traders, such as the drummer, the solicitor, bill poster, advertising agent. Consider the waste incidental to the crowding into cities, made necessary by competition and by monopoly railroad rates. Consider the slums, the bad air, the disease, the waste, the vital energies. Consider the office buildings, the waste of time and material in the piling of story upon story and the borrowing underground. Then take the whole business of insurance, the enormous mass of administrative and clerical labor involves, and the utter waste. I do not follow that, said the editor. The Cooperative Commonwealth is a universal automatic insurance company and savings bank for all of its members, capital being the property of all, injury to its shared by all and made up by all. The bank is the universal government credit account, the ledger in which every individual's earnings and spendings are balanced. There is also a universal government bulletin in which are listed and precisely described everything which the Commonwealth has for sale, and no one makes any profit by the sale. There is no longer any stimulus to extravagance, and no misinterpretation, no cheating, no adulteration or imitation, no bribery or grafting. How the price of an article is determined. The price is the labor it has. Let me back up. The price is the labor it has cost to make and deliver it, and it is determined by the first principles of arithmetic. The million workers in the nation's wheat fields have worked 100 days each, and the total product of the labor is 1 billion bushels. So the value of a bushel of wheat is 1/10 the part of farm labor day. If we employ an arbitrary symbol and pay, say, $5 a day for farm work, then the cost of a bushel of wheat is 50 cents. You say for farm work, said Mr. Maynard, then labor is not to be paid alike. Manifestly not, since some work is easy and some hard, and we should have millions of rural mail carriers and no coal miners. Of course, the wages may be left the same, and the hours varied. One or the other will have to be varied continually, according as a greater or lesser of workers is needed in any particular industry. That is precisely what is done at present, except that the transfer of the workers is accomplished blindly and imperfectly by rumors and advertisements, instead of instantly and completely by the universal government bulletin. How about those occupations in which time is difficult to calculate? What is the labor cost of a book? Obviously, it is the labor cost of paper, printing, and binding it, about 1/5 of its present cost. And the author? I've already said that the state could not control intellectual production. The state might say that it had taken a year to write a book, and that the author might say it had taken 30. Goss said that in every bon mot of his had cost a purse of gold. What I outline here is a national, or rather international, system for providing the material needs of men. Since a man has intellectual needs also, he will work longer, earn more, and provide for him to his own taste and his own way. I live on the same earth as the majority. I wear the same kind of shoes and sleep in the same kind of bed, but I do not think the same kind of thoughts, and I do not wish to pay for such thinkers as the majority selects. I wish such things to be left to free effort, as at present. If people want to listen to a certain preacher, they get together and contribute what they please, and pay for a church and support a preacher, and then listen to him. I, whom do not want to listen to him, stay away, and it costs me nothing. In the same way, there are magazines about Egyptian coins and Catholic saints and flying machines and athletic records, and I know nothing about any of them. On the other hand, if wage slavery were abolished and I could earn some spare money without paying tribute to an exploiting capitalist, then there would be a magazine for the purpose of interrupting and popularizing the gospel at Friedrich Nietzsche, the prophet of evolution and also of Horace Fletcher, the inventor of the noble science of clean eating, and incidentally, perhaps, for the discovery of long skirts and the scientific breeding of men and women, and the establishing of divorce by mutual consent. Dr. Schliemann paused for a moment. That was a lecture, he said with a laugh, and yet I am only begun. What else is there? Asked Maynard. Let me have a drink first. How are we doing? Oh, we're a little over. We're getting close. We got to finish this. I have pointed out some of the negative ways of competition. Answered the other. I have hardly mentioned the positive economies of cooperation. Allowing 5 to a family, there are 15 million families in this country, and at least 10 million of these live separately. The domestic drudge being either the wife or a wage slave. Now set aside the modern system of pneumatic house cleaning and the economies of cooperative cooking, and consider one single item, the washing of dishes. Surely it is moderate to say that the dishwashing for a family of 5 takes half an hour a day. And with 10 hours of a day's work, it takes, therefore, 500,000 able-bodied persons, mostly women, to do the dishwashing of the country. And note that this is most filthy and deadening and brutalizing work, that it is the cause of anemia, nervousness, ugliness, and ill temper, or prostitution, suicide and insanity, or drunken husbands and degenerate children, for all of which things the community has naturally to pay. And now consider that in each of these little free communities, there would be a machine which would wash and dry the dishes, and do it not merely to the eye and the touch, but scientifically, sterilizing them. And do it all, saving of the drudgery and 9/10 of the time. All of these things you would find in the books of Dr. Gilman, and then Dr. Kropotkin Fields, factories and workshops, and read about the new science of agriculture, which has been built up in the last 10 years, by which, with made soils and intensive culture, a gardener can raise 10 or 12 crops in a season, and 200 tons of vegetable upon a single acre, by which a population of the whole globe could be supported on soil now cultivated in the United States alone. It is impossible to apply such methods now, owing to the ignorance and poverty of our scattered farming population. But imagine the problem of providing the food supply of our nation, once taken in hand systematically and rationing by scientists. All the poor and rocky land set apart for a national timber service, in which our children play, and our young men hunt, and our poets dwell. The most favorable climate for soil for each product selected, the exact requirements of the community known, and the acreage figured accordingly, the most improved machinery employed, under the direction of expert agricultural chemists. Excuse me. I was brought up on a farm, and I know the awful deadlines of farm work. And I like to picture it all as it will be after the revolution, to picture the greatest potato planting machine drawn by four horses, or an electric motor plowing the furrow, cutting and dropping and covering the potatoes, and planting a score of acres a day. To picture the great potato digging machine running by electricity, perhaps, and moving across a 1,000-acre field, scooping up earth and potatoes and dropping the latter into sacks. To every other kind of vegetable and fruit handled in the same way. Apples and oranges picked by machinery, cows milked by electricity, things which are already done, as you may know. To picture the harvest fields of the future, to which millions of happy men and women come for a summer holiday, brought by special trains, the exact needful number to each place, and to contrast all this with our present agonizing system of independent small farming, a stunted, haggard, ignorant man, mated with a yellow, lean, and sadly-eyed drudge, and toiling from 4 o'clock in the morning until 9 at night, working the children as soon as they are able to walk, scratching the soil with its primitive tools, and shut out of all the knowledge of hope, from all the benefits of science and invention, and all the joys of the spirit, held into a bare existence by competition in labor, and boasting of his freedom because he is too blind to see it, too blind to see his chains. Dr. Schliemann paused a moment, and then he continued, Placed beside this fact of an unlimited food supply, the newest discovery of physiologists, and what most of the ills of the human system are due to overfeeding. And then again, it has been proven that meat is an unnecessary food, and meat is obviously more difficult to produce than vegetable food, less pleasant to prepare and handle, and more likely to be unclean. But what of that, so long as it tickles the palate more strongly? How would socialism change that? Asked the girl student quickly. It was the first time that she had spoken. So long as we have wage slavery, answered Schleiman, it matters not in the least how debasing and repulsive a task may be. It is easy to find people to perform it, but just as soon as labor is set free, then the price of such work will begin to rise. So one by one, the old dingy and unsanitary factories will come down. It will be cheaper to build new, and so the steamships will be provided with stroking machinery, and so the dangerous trades will be made safe, or substitutes will be found for their products, in exactly the same way as the citizens of our industrial republic become refined. Year by year, the cost of slaughterhouse products will increase, until eventually those who want to eat meat will have to do their own killing. How long do you think the custom would survive then? To go on to another item. One of the necessary accomplishments of capitalism in the democracy is political corruption. And one of the consequences of civic administration by ignorant and vicious politicians is that preventable diseases kill off half your population. And even if a science were allowed to try, it could do little, because the majority of human beings are not yet human beings at all, but simply machines for the creating of wealth for others. They are penned up in filthy houses and left to rot and stew in misery. And the conditions of their life make them ill faster than all the doctors in the world could heal them. And so, of course, they remain as centers of contagion, poisoning the lives of all of us and making happiness impossible for even the most selfish. For this reason, I would seriously maintain that all the medical and surgical discoveries that science can make in the future will be of less importance than the application of the knowledge we already possess, when the disinherited of the earth have established their right to human existence. And here, Herr Doctor relapsed into another silence. Jurgis had noticed that the beautiful girl who sat by the center table was listening with something of the same look that he himself had worn, and time when he had first discovered socialism. Jurgis would have liked to have talked to her. He felt sure that she would have understood him. Later on in the evening, when the group broke up, he heard Mrs. Fisher say to her in a low voice, "I wonder if Mr. Maynard will still write the same things about socialism," to which she answered, "I don't know, but if he does, we shall know that he is a knave." And only a few hours after this came Election Day, when the long campaign was over and the whole country seemed to stand still and hold its breath, awaiting the issue. Jurgis and the rest of the staff of Hin's hotel could hardly stop to finish their dinner before they hurried off to the big hall which the party had hired for the evening. But already there were people waiting, and already the telegraph instrument on the stage had begun clicking with returns. When the final accounts were made up, the socialist vote had proved to be over 4,000, an increase of something like 350% in 4 years. And that was doing well. But the party was dependent for its early returns upon messages from the locals. And naturally, those locals which had been most successful were the ones which felt most like reporting. And so that night, everyone in the hall believed that the vote was going to be 6 or 7 or even 800,000. Just such an incredible increase had been made in Chicago, and in the state, the vote of the city had been 6,700 and 1,900, and now was 47,000. That of Illinois had been 9,600, and now had been 69,000. So as the evening waxed and the crowd piled in, the meeting was in sight to be seen. Bulletins would be read, and people would shout about themselves hoarse, and then someone would make a speech, and there would be more shouting. Then, in a brief silence and more bulletins, there would come more messages from the secretaries of neighboring states reporting their achievements. The vote of Indiana had gone from 23% 2,300 to 12,000, of Wisconsin from 7,000 to 28,000, of Ohio from 4,800 to 36,000. There were telegrams to the national office from enthusiastic individuals in little towns which had made amazing and unprecedented increases in a single year. Benedict, Kansas from 26 to 260. Henderson, Kentucky from 19 to 111. Holland, Michigan from 14 to 208. Cleo, Oklahoma from 0 to 104. Martinsbury, Ohio from 0 to 296. And many more of the same kind. There were literally hundreds of towns. There would be reports from half a dozen of them in a single batch of telegrams, and the men who read the dispatches, all to the audience, were old campaigners who had been to the place and helped to make the vote and could make appropriate comments. Quincy, Illinois from 189 to 831, and was where the mayor had arrested the socialist speaker. Crawford County, Kansas from 285 to 1975. There were the home of the Appeal to Reason, Battle Creek, Michigan, from 4,261 to 10,184. There was the Answer of Labor of the Citizens Alliance movement. And there were official returns from from various precincts and wards of the city itself, whether it was a factory district or one of the silk stocking wards, seemed to make no particular difference in the increase. But one of the things which surprised the party leaders most was the tremendous vote that came rolling in from the stockyards. Packingtown comprised 3 wards of the city, and the vote in the spring of 1903 had been 500. In the fall of the same year, 1,600. Now, only 1 year later, it was 6,300, and the Democratic vote only 8,800. There were other wards in which the Democratic vote had actually been surpassed, and in 2 districts, members of the state legislature had been elected. Thus, Chicago now led the country, and had set a new standard for the party, and it had now shown the working men the way. So spoke an orator upon the platform, and 2,000 pairs of eyes were fixed upon him. 2,000 voices were cheering in his every sentence. The orator had been the head of the city's relief bureau in the stockyards, until the sight of misery and corruption had made him sick. He was young, hungry-looking, full of fire, and as he swung his long arms and beat up the crowd, to Jurgis he seemed to be the very spirit of the revolution. Organize, organize, organize. That was the cry. He was afraid of this tremendous vote, which his party had not expected, and which it had not earned. These men are not socialists, he cried. This election will pass, and the excitement will die, and people will forget about it. And if you forget about it too, you will sink back and rest upon your oars. We shall lose this vote that we should have polled today, and our enemies will laugh at us in scorn. It rests with you to take your resolution now in the flush victory, to find these men who have voted for us and bring them to our meetings and organize them and bind them to us. We shall not find all our campaigns as easy as this one. Everywhere in the country tonight, the old party politicians are studying this vote and setting their sails by it. And nowhere will there be quicker and more cunning than here in our own city. 50,000 socialist votes in Chicago means a municipal ownership democracy in the spring. And then they will fool the voters once more. And all the powers of plunder and corruption will be swept into office again. But whatever they may do when they get in, there is one thing they will not do, and that will be the thing for which they were elected. They will not give the people of our city municipal ownership. They will not mean to do it. They will not try to do it. All that they will do is give our party in Chicago the greatest opportunity that has ever come to socialism in America. We shall have the sham reformers self-stultified and self-convicted. We shall have the radical democracy left without a lie with which to cover its nakedness. And then will begin the rush that will never be checked, the tide that will never turn. It has reached its flood. That will be irresistible, overwhelming, the rallying of the outraged working man of Chicago to our standard. We shall organize them. We shall drill them. We shall marshal them for the victory. We shall bear down the opposition. We shall sweep it before us. And Chicago will be ours. Chicago will be ours. Chicago will be ours. Holy moly. That's it, guys. We are done. We are done. Trying to figure out. Yeah. No, wait a minute. We had 21 pages to read tonight. Well, we did it. We got through it. The jungle is done. The jungle is done. And what a beautiful day, though a crazy day weather-wise. I don't know about in the dam, but here in the Berg, it was about It was about 5:00, 5:30ish, and one heck of a storm blew in. My neighbor's tree, a good chunk of his tree, got knocked down, and people had to stop in the road, and they had to drag it out. And a lot of fire alarms were going off during the day. Relax, relax. Anyways, great book. Really, really good book. I'm glad that we finished it. I'm very, very glad that we finished it. I don't think Stella liked it as much as the other book, but she seemed to be always yelling at me during this book. I don't know if you guys ever heard her or not, but she would be off on the side here, just whining, just whining. But anyway, so a good day weather-wise. It got almost 80 here, but a little bit of crazy rain. So let's talk about what happened today. And there's a little bit of craziness, guys, I think across the country. And there's a little bit of, like it's like that lion that's been caged up and is ready to pounce. And from what I understand around the Capital District, that's kind of what happened today, right? Because manufacturing opened today, and then construction opened today. And my buddy had to go get a part, and it's funny, he just texted me before we started. He had to go get a part for his water heater over at Home Depot, and he said, even later in the day, it was packed. No social distancing, no masks. And my understanding was that these places were still supposed to kind of operate at a 50% capacity. So if your store can hold 100, you can only let 50 people in. Well, I guess they kind of got overrun. My only hope is that this will settle down, that not too many people are going to get sick from all of this, and that we're going to see a spike, right? We're going to see a spike this week when people and the retail and these places start to open up. We're going to see more people get sick. We know that's going to happen. But what they keep talking about is that the transmission rate. As long as the transmission rate stays low, then we're okay, right? And I guess this is to be expected. I guess it's to be expected that now after, I guess it's 9 weeks, right? 9 weeks of this, people are finally like, let me at it, If I was a carpenter, if I was a roofer, if I was a painter, you've missed some time. You've missed some time doing some work. So now it's time to get at it. And I have a feeling that probably people that had lined up like house painting or, I'm going to have the kitchen gutted or something like that. I have a feeling that, those types of jobs, it's going to be tricky to get all those done now that a lot of these people have lost all this time. Contractors have lost all of this time. But hopefully they prioritize. Like if I was a contractor right now, probably what I would say to a lot of my customers is this: I need to do outside work first, and then I need to work, move inside. And I think a lot of contractors probably, some are doing more inside work than outside work, but some do it all, So Anyway, what do we got? Okay, so I couldn't find anywhere. Oh, excuse me. The number of people in New York that died over the past 24 hours. I looked for it, but I saw that hospitalizations down a little bit. I think new cases are kind of holding firm. I think ICU admissions are down a little bit. So, we're still on that rocky little, just kind of taking it slow and heading down, but it's heading in the right direction. And what Governor Cuomo said, and it's true, is that we are really leading the charge with all of this. So if you look at New York, we got hit hard. We've learned how to kind of deal with it, and we're dealing with it. Whereas other places, it's not even really hit yet. And I think that's the thing, is that modern technology and communication has allowed people to, almost live somewhere else, right? And I mean, that's like amazing. Today, I played a video game, right? You guys know that I love my board games. That's my big hobby. The boys and I play all these different, really cool, different themed board games. Oh, and, this podcast that I listen to, well, this guy started a Discord server. So people jump on the Discord server, and then they jump on this thing called Tabletop Simulator, and they play board games. So today, I was playing a board game with a couple guys from England and a guy from Holland. We're just hanging out, right? So our worlds are connected by this technology. And I think when it comes to this disease, that's part of the problem, is that some people are like, well, hey, you know what? Things are getting better. So whatever, let us out. But they don't understand that it's not even reached them yet, right? It's not even reached them. And I guess, like in Wisconsin today, a federal district judge, I think, overturned the governor's stay-at-home order, and like the bars were packed. So people just like came running out. So we'll see what happens in 2 weeks in Wisconsin. I hope that it's not, thousands of people dead from COVID. I hope it's not thousands of people in the hospital from COVID. I hope that it's people were smart and they were not, they weren't just going just absolutely crazy. We'll see. We'll see in the weeks to come. So this House bill that was supposed to go up for vote today, here's what we're looking at. They kept refining it. So everybody that got a $1,200 check will get another, I believe, a few more rounds of $1,200 checks, but I don't know how many more rounds. Money for state, local government. Money for hazard pay for essential workers. Man, whoa. That light is bright. Rent and utility assistance. Postal service, school and mortgage assistance. And this bill, this $3 trillion bill, was only 1,816 pages long. So you want to know how long that is? If you think about a ream of paper, right, like copy paper, that's 500 pages. So that this is almost 4. That's how long this bill is. Okay, that's a lot of crap in there. All right, so when it comes to our reopening here in the Empire State, the great state of New York, here's what we're looking at. Regions of the state. I can't remember how many regions they've broken us into, but each region has to have a regional office, and all the numbers have to be pumped into the regional office. And every single day, there's going to be like a regional czar, like a regional dude or dudette that is going to look at the numbers. and they're going to have to report to the state. So, you guys are in the capital district. I believe Schoharie County is at the northern end of the southern tier. And then there's the Mohawk Valley, and then there's the Adirondacks, the Finger Lakes, right? All these different regions. So each one of these regions has to be meeting all of those protocols, or the region's going to get shut down. So it's a smart way to do things, kind of compartmentalize everything and say, okay, you've got to really become the experts of this area and watch this area. And if things aren't cool, you need to let us know at the state level. I mean, personally, I think it's kind of smart. It's going to cost a lot of money because we're going to have to hire a lot of people, and they've already talked about this. A lot of people are going to have to be hired as all these tracers, so there's going to have to be a lot of state jobs. So we shall see. We shall see. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. Let me go back. I think I skipped over it in the top. Retail sales dropped 16.4%. Now, okay, bad. That's bad. I'm going to be honest with you, my friends. I actually think that number is surprisingly low. I would have thought that retail sales would have dropped at least 40%, considering the amount of stores that are closed, considering the amount of people that are out of work. So honestly, you know what? If that's a true number, I kind of think we're doing okay then. Now here's the last bit of news that I have for you guys, and I was kind of blown away at this. I really was. Next weekend. Yes, next weekend is Memorial Day weekend. So next Saturday, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Connecticut beaches are going to be opened. The governor is working with the governors of those states, and they are opening the beaches. And here's the dealio with the beaches. Only 50% capacity, only no large gatherings, no groups of like over 4, no volleyball, no frisbee, no this, no that. Parking lots can't be more than 50% capacity. This has to be monitored, that has to be monitored, blah, 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 blah. Well, holy crap, I'm like, and I don't know. I'm like, if they said to us, right here, let me throw this out. If they said to us, okay, Mahanasan, in the fall, every single day, you have to give every staff member, every student a mask. You have to give them a mask, a new mask, when they enter school. And there has to be hand sanitizer stations in every hallway. And there's got to be this, and we couldn't do it. We couldn't open, right? Because where the heck are we going to get the money? Where are we going to afford this, or how are we going to afford this? So part of me is wondering, like, is the governor saying, "Hey, go ahead and open," knowing the beaches, the municipalities that run the beaches are going to go, yeah, we can't do this. We can't open this way. It's not going to work. So I don't know. I'm not too sure. I'm not sure. On the other hand, I really wonder how many people are going to go out swimming Memorial Day weekend. I don't know. Right? I don't know. I certainly think probably a lot of people in New York City are going to be like, yeah, we want to get the puck out of New York. A little hockey joke there, right? Let's get the puck out of New York, and let's go to the Jersey Shore swimming, or let's go to, out on Long Island, out on the, the Hamptons there, or whatever. But I don't know. And again, I'm really starting to wonder what's going to happen out here tomorrow. I'm wondering where I live, because the capital region is not technically open. However, where I live it's a 45-minute drive away. So are people going to hop in their car with their family and come out here and bring all your city germs out to where we live? I don't know. I don't know. We shall see. All right, peeps, let's do this day in history. Oh, I skipped this. Sorry. Retail stores that are reopening today, right? If you're going to open up retail stores, you've got to have curbside service. If you cannot do curbside service, if it is impractical, you can only let 50% capacity in your store. Everybody has to have a mask. Every employee has to have a mask, and you have to have hand sanitizer readily available for your employees, separate hand sanitizer ready for your customers. Okay, so that's that. I'm sorry I skipped that. This day in history, my friends, this day in history. The 7 Years' War began on this day. We studied the 7 Years' War, but we don't call it the 7 Years' War here in America. We call it the French and Indian War. So that began on this day in 1756. On this day in the year 1800, John Adams moved the capital of our country to Washington, D.C. Big jump on this day in 1918. And this is kind of those ones where you're probably, what's Mr. Martin bringing this up for? A guy by the name of Henry Johnson, a private first class, won the Croix, I don't know French, the Croix de Guerre. I don't know. I'm assuming that means cross of something. And Henry Johnson was a member of the Harlem Hellfighters. And African Americans in World War I were not allowed to fight with other Americans, with white Americans. So basically what we did is we leased them to the French. And many of these men fought gallantly. And Henry Johnson will posthumously, posthumously, meaning after he died, he will finally be given the Medal of Honor. And he is from Albany. He was from Albany. Henry Johnson Boulevard goes from Washington Park up through Arbor Hill out to Route 9. So he's a local dude. On this date in 1942, the Women's Army Corps was created, right? So today, in the Army and the Marines, right, women can finally serve in combat on the ground. It's been a long struggle for women to receive that level of equality, but they finally have it. There aren't large numbers of women in the military that way, but it is growing. On this day in 1972, Alabama Governor George Wallace, who's running for president, is shot, and he will be permanently paralyzed. And he was Wallace was a open racist and not such a good guy. And he will obviously not win his bid for the presidency. On this day in 1988, it'll take about a year for this to finally end, but the Soviet Union officially begins withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan. And then on this day in 2009, again, all this made national news, but this is another local one. The GE begins dredging the Hudson River. Right? GE had been dumping chemicals into the Hudson River for a very long time. They had been admitting it. And finally, the government in 2009 forced them to begin the process of digging up all those chemicals and trapping the chemicals and taking them out of the Hudson River. And for a long time, they argued that, maybe what they should just have to do is pay restitutions to the municipalities and the people that, they knew had gotten sick from this, because digging up the chemicals would actually be worse than, just letting them lay there. So, anywho, my friends, that's it. We read a little long tonight, but boy, we are done. We are done, son. And we are ready to move into our next book. We are going to read some fun fiction, young adult fiction, starting on Sunday night. I am number 4, and I am excited to read this book with you guys. And it's about 400 pages, but it reads pretty darn quick. We'll move through it. And it's a lot more dialogue. So we'll move through it. I got to get a bookmark. We'll move through it. That's all I got for you tonight, guys. I hope that you are well where you are. I hope that the storm didn't hit you too hard. I hope that you have a good weekend. Tomorrow is supposed to be 70, partly cloudy. I'm getting my butt up early. I'm going to do some hiking. My dad and I got invited into this War College Zoom thing, actually a 7 Years War College thing. So that's going to be pretty cool to be in that and to be a part of that. And then tomorrow night, the boys and I are actually going to build a fire pit in our backyard. So I'm going to get the stuff to do that. And hopefully tomorrow night, we'll have our first fire, which will be pretty cool. I don't know. There's something real cool and relaxing about sitting by a fire, just having a nice cold drink, whether it's a beer or a ginger ale or whatever, and just kind of watching that fire crackle. It's something that I love to do. I love to go camping. I love to have a nice fire. And I can't tell you how many times I've woken up at like 4 a.m. and I'm just like slumped over in my chair because I fell asleep next to a nice, calming, relaxing fire. There's just nothing like it. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to building that pit. We've been cleaning up the lawn and cleaning up the back, and we've got I think 2 acres of, maybe it's 1.5 acres. And there's a bunch of trees, so we've just been cleaning up and cutting them up, and we've got 4 or 5 big, huge trash barrels, and we've just got it loaded with wood. So every time we have a fire, we can just pull one of those out and get to it and get to our nice relaxing fire. So, all right, my friends, you keep running that marathon. I miss you guys. I wish we were back in school. We know it's not going to happen this year. We know we're going to see each other in the fall at some point. But be good. Keep running the marathon. Don't sprint. We will be back in some kind of normal setting sometime in the not so near future. So hang in there, and I'll see you guys on Sunday night. Be good.